All right. There we go. All right. I'm Brian Risley, President of Southwest Florida Astronomical Society. Welcome to our first meeting of 2024, a January meeting. I'm going to introduce our speaker and let him get started. And then we'll have a little slideshow presentation from the astrophotography group once he's done speaking. And then we'll do our business meeting. All right. I'd like to welcome Dr. Motta. It's briefly 2023 marked 100 years since the first gathering of Springfield telescope makers in 1923 on Breezy Hill in Springfield, Vermont. The prime mover of the founding of Stellafane was Russell Porter, who was a unique individual with an amazing career ranging from Arctic explorer, architect, artist, and engineer on Mount Palomar 2-inch telescope. We remember him fondly for, however, is his leading role in fostering amateur astronomy and telescope making. Prior to his efforts, if an amateur astronomer wanted a telescope, the choices were to buy a very expensive scope from Clark or Brashear companies or import one from England. Thus, only very wealthy individuals such as Percival Lowell could become amateur astronomers. Porter self-taught himself how to grind and polish telescope mirrors for personal use and then taught others how to accomplish this, who eventually became Springfield telescope makers. Being based in Springfield, Vermont, he helped with the town had a workforce that excelled in precision gear and mechanical construction, aiding in telescope making. This eventually attracted the attention of Ingalls, an American scientific American. He wrote a seminal article in 1925 in the essay. That led to a worldwide interest in telescope making. His top book described the early Stellafane years, the amazing career of Russell Porter. Introduce Dr. Motta.
All right.
And just
this on? Can you hear me?
Aside, in the lobby, we have one of Porter's garden scopes.
That is correct. And in fact, it's serial number 10, which quite impressed me. Our club historian up at Springfield Telescope Makers wanted pictures of it. I didn't realize it was serial number 10. So you got actually quite a find here. So can everyone hear me? Both places? Good. So how many people here have heard of Russell Porter? Just curious. It's only about half the audience. I assume everyone here is an amateur astronomer or wannabe? Most? Okay. Then Russell Porter should be a patron saint. And up in Stellafane, at least, he's achieved godhood. And there's a reason for that. Prior to his popularizing how to make telescopes, if you wanted a telescope, you had to be like the Lowells. You had to be independently wealthy, owned half of Massachusetts, so you could afford to buy an Alvin Clark and set it up in Arizona. Other than that, the average telescope, and I'm talking about a 3 or 4 inch model, was 2 years' salary for the average person back then. No one bought telescopes because you couldn't afford them. So Russell Porter learned how to make telescopes, popularized it, started Stellafane, and then it got published in Scientific American, and it was a groundswell of enthusiasm that led to amateur astronomy as we know it today. This is my telescope. It's a 32-inch f6, which I built completely. Every part there is done by hand, either on my lathe or milling machine from scrap stuff, and cast the glass. 2011, there's a Sky and Tel article about it. But I wouldn't have built that if it wasn't for Russell Porter, and if it wasn't for the people at the Springfield Telescope Makers and the Amateur Telescope Makers of Boston. My parents were poor Italian immigrants, and my father, knowing my interest, wanted to get me a small 60-millimeter Japanese refractor. I convinced him, just give me the money and I'll grind the telescope. And I did a 8-inch f7. I think it got me scholarship money, and eventually, even though I was going to go into astrophysics, ended up in medicine, but it actually helped me get into medical school. None of that would have happened if Russell Porter didn't exist. So let's see if this works. I think go up. This isn't moving. Oh, maybe I've got the wrong. Huh. Yeah, on the right, correct? It's not moving.
No, I'm moving.
Oh, okay. I'm holding it correct. It's this here, right?
Yeah, should be it. Being stubborn.
Okay, I'll just say next slide then. So the reason we had, stay on that slide first. The reason we had 100th year celebration this past year. Don't push that button. Okay. Was because the pink, which is the building on what it looked like in 1924 when it was completed in January of 24, started in 23, was built by Russell Porter and the Springfield telescope makers. So this was our 100th year anniversary this past summer. This is what it looks like nowadays, kept its original form. It's actually a National Historic Monument. Okay. Seems to be a delay. Okay. I think I got it now. All right. Sorry, it keeps jumping. This is Russell Porter, was born in 1871, lived to 1949. He had an incredible career, really a Renaissance man. Started off by school in Vermont, engineering. Father ran out of money. He ended up going to work in Boston and somehow wound up in an MIT program on designing. There he met Arctic explorer Perry, and he got inspired by that and went on 13 Arctic missions, not just with him, but with others. When he finally got that out of his system, he settled in Port Clyde as an architect and built a colony. I'm going to go through these with all these pictures, by the way, from archives of the Springfield telescope makers. He then started this artistic colony until he got called back to Vermont because the owner of Jones and Lambert, which were back then, all the high-tech gear making equipment was in New England places where there was water power. There was no electric power, so everything was water power. And they made all the gears for the rest of the country. So it was a technological group there. And he needed Porter with his skills to help build what's called a comparator. We'll go through that. That led to him teaching people how to make things, including telescopes. That started Stellafane. And then eventually he got called to California by Caltech to help design the 200-inch Hale telescope. That was his background. So here he is in his college years. And Russell Porter family in 1899. Interesting dress. Notice back then, everyone was well dressed, which is interesting. Even grinding mirrors, doing yard work, everyone had three-piece suits on. They would look down on us right now. So started off at Norwich University in Vermont, University of Vermont, then MIT. Again, he met Perry, got inspired by a lecture at MIT, signed up for a number of Arctic expeditions. And the last expedition he did, I don't have a pointer here, but up left in Alaska in 1906 was to survey Mount McKinley. But his journeys took him to Greenland quite a bit. Went to north of Scandinavia, and in fact had a winter over when the wooden ship he was on got crushed and caught in the ice, and they had to spend a year there waiting for rescue. So this is some of his pictures, and he did quite a bit he was quite artistic and took quite a number of, should point it that way. He is in Greenland. A number of his photographs and drawings especially are in the National Archives in Washington, D.C. now. Greenland, 1900. Porter is, I believe, the one on the right. And he did paintings everywhere he went and sketches. Guard dog, sled dogs, I should say. The Tromso, 1905. And then the SS Hope caught in the ice and ship was crushed and he had a winter over. Despite that, he kept on going expeditions, went to Denali, and he was one of the original survey team that surveyed that whole area. Come on. There we go. Despite that, he still was interested in glaciers and went to Switzerland for a winter. When he finished, got that out of his system, he settled down to what he thought was going to be his life's work, which is set up an artist colony in Port Clyde, Maine, along the Rocky Coast there. He was an architect as well as an engineer, and he designed them. This was his house, but he also built others and attracted quite a menagerie of people who were all artistic. He built he got two 16-inch blanks from Brashear, the Brashear Company, courtesy of Hartness, who owned Jones and Lambert, that was a friend of his. And with that, he built a poloscope in that house. Still not, oh, there we go. So poloscope, well, I don't know how many people went to New England in wintertime, but it gets a little cold. So it's not like down here in Florida. And the way he designed it is the scope would rotate and had a mirror which would send the beam down, and he observed from the comfort of his inside building. Here's a more modern photograph of the building still standing. Painting of the porch of his house. And various cottages there that were bought and some were rented. So he spent about 10 years there. He designed the Belfast Church. So he made money by being an architect while he was there. He also was very artistic and designed mementos like this. So this is someone looking through a Foucault tester at a mirror. I don't have a pointer here, but the mirror's on the right. And if you look closely in the middle, there is a pitch lap. So basically, he's demonstrating how to make a telescope mirror. Here is a dish with him looking through a telescope. And that design, that wavy design, I don't know how many people, anyone here make a telescope, make a mirror? Okay, so you would recognize that wiggle. That's what a parabola looks like through a Foucault tester. He also did sundials, sun clock. Notice the analemma. This isn't working. Oh, there we go. Another sundial he made. So I'm just showing these to show he was quite an artistic gentleman. So James Hartness was governor of Vermont 21 to 23, but he was CEO and owner of Jones and Lambert, which made, at the time, the world's best gears. And it was all water power along the Vermont rivers in Springfield. He wanted what's called a comparator built in order to make sure that his lead screws were precisely made. And he figured, he knew the skill set of Russell Porter, so he enticed him back to Vermont, where he was born, to help him build this comparator. So here's Porter and Hartness. Porter's on the right. And here's the comparator, which they got a patent on and helped them build very precise instruments, which they, of course, sold around the country and around the world at the time. That was it's kind of like the Silicon Valley of machine tools nowadays. This isn't advancing. Okay, here we go. So Harkness was the one who came up with the idea. He was an amateur astronomer as well. And he built this still exists at the Harkness House in Springfield, Vermont. If you're ever up there, it's worth looking. They got a museum there. He had a 6-inch refractor, and basically the whole dome rotated, and that scope could point anywhere, but the light, you'd sit in the comfort of your dome there, and you'd walk underground to the house. It's about a 200-foot underground passage, so he never had to go outside. And again, if you ever lived in Vermont in the wintertime, you understand why. So he enticed them back in order to build this optical comparator. And this was his home that he made a sketch of in 2019 that he bought. Russell Porter had married Alice, and that's his daughter. And here he is on his porch, setting up apparently a scope for solar observing. I should have mentioned while he was up in the Arctic, one of the reasons why he got into this was one of his jobs was surveying and recording. You could see from his paintings, but the other job was to be the chronometer for the ship. So he'd measure the solar position and star position so that he could map where they were going. And he got quite good at it. But then, because he used the same equipment to look at the sky, he got interested in amateur astronomy, which is why he started building his own telescopes. So while he was there, since he had already built this 16-inch, and it was quite successful, he convinced people at Jones and Lambert, again, these are technical people who were making high-quality gears, would anyone be interested in learning how to build telescopes? Here's the original members who signed up. They were all employees of Jones and Lambert, except for Gladys Piper at the end, who is a school teacher in town, and she wanted to join in. She was working on a 3-inch. Not advancing. There we go. So here's the original group of telescope makers, and this is while they were at work. So they dressed pretty well back then. So Russell Porter is the one with the mirror on his hand next to Gladys, to the right of the woman Gladys, and he's holding a mirror in his hand. And this is the original group that built telescopes back then. Come on. Sorry for this. Okay, there we go. And he would demonstrate, it looks like in this case, he has either an 8 or 10-inch telescope that he's grinding. So actually, in this case, polishing, because it looks like that's a pitch lap underneath. So he's demonstrating how to make a telescope mirror. And this is how I built them myself. But notice he's got always a tie, 3-piece suit. They were well dressed, and they took pride in their work. Here he is showing the mirror. Wrote songs about it. Wish this would. Here we go. And so they built these telescopes and decided to start having star parties. At first, they just went to various observing fields and then to people's houses and had star parties just like we have them today. These were the original star parties, because you got to remember, back then, other than these people who made the telescopes, no one in the country had a telescope. If you wanted a telescope, you sent away to England for 2 or 3 years' salary for a little 2 or 3-incher, or Alvin Clark or Bashir, and that would also cost you a fortune. You couldn't just buy from a Celestron catalog back then. They didn't exist. They went up to mountaintops. Mount Ephraim is outside of Springfield, and camp out and observe all night. So you worry about mosquitoes down here. Have a cow go across your telescope. Westminster. Oop. Come on. Mount Ephraim again. I just love showing these older photographs. We did not invent the Star Party. They did. Come on. Frank Whitney is one of the original founders of Stellafane and Springfield telescope makers. He is showing off his, I think that was an 8-inch telescope that he built. Many of these are in the club archives up there and the museum we have. Hawks Mountain, 1921. Again, look at the cars they had back then. He was still doing surveying work at the time on the side, and they had to put a marker, National Geodesic survey marker up there. So he surveyed it, and then they put this marker, which I believe is still there. But he also added the shape of a Foucault test of a mirror, or a telescope mirror. That's what that design is in the middle. But of course, it measures the latitude and longitude exactly, which is what he was being hired to do. Oscar Fulham, one of the original founders, his telescope. These telescopes, if you bought them back then, again, would be a 2 or 3 year salary for the average wage worker. Hawks Observing, 1921. People get together, spent all night observing. Notice this telescope in the bottom. That's one of his garden telescopes. He started designing them and selling them. You have one out here. In fact, you got serial number 10. That's what they used. He popularized that. Those are a collector's item. If you see one at a garden shop, jump on it. You can sell it for a lot of money. Anyways, all the early telescopes, they entered in a Vermont fair, 1922. And it was a huge hit. They won every prize. People were astounded that people up here in Vermont could build their own telescopes and observe the heavens. And it really made waves. People wanted to know how we could do the same thing. So again, he had quite a sense of humor. So he's talking, he had many of these, but I just show you a few of them. So how can we get this scope together? So he's putting it together, looking for the moon, waiting for the image, and it looked awful. So at midnight, he just takes an axe to it and destroys it. He was a perfectionist, that the scope had to work well. Oh, come on. I think, okay. So Stellafane site. His father owned a small plot of land on top of Breezy Hill and had a shack there. And he thought it was a perfect place to observe. So he actually ended up starting Stellafane there and then eventually donated land to Stellafane. So here they are looking at the site where they want to put up Stellafane. People here have heard of Stellafane, right? This is not okay. I'll go at some point. Mount Scottney looking north. Now back then, notice there's no trees. All the trees were cut down for industry and heating and everything else. Now it's incredibly wooden. You cannot see Mount Scottney from the pink clubhouse unless you get up on a little bit because it's all covered with trees. But Vermont has way more trees now than it did back in 1920. So here was the original shack that his father owned, and they used that as a place to set up and observe from, but they eventually built the pink when the club got formally started. Back then, again, there's the shack. There we go. That's Russell, Porter, and Alice. And Stellafane would be down that depression, then up the next rise. That's where the pink is right now. So here they are at the site. deciding how they're going to build this. That's Russell Porter crouched down on the left. And they start bulldozing the road up to the top. So the concept was 1922-23 that they'd start a club and teach people to make telescopes. And they decided they got to build something better than the shack. So the pink got started in early fall of 23 and got finished in January of 24. And since then, some minor additions have been added, but it's a historical registered site, so we try not to make any significant changes to it. You might say, well, why is it called the Pink? Back then, they ran out of money, and they were looking for donations from townspeople for paint. Well, the local paint store supplier said, we got all these leftovers. There wasn't enough of any one color. So they just mixed it all together and it ended up hot pink. And that's what they painted it. And that's the way it's been ever since. That's why it's called the Pink, because of the type of paints that were donated. So here they are fixing it up on the roof. And pretty much when it's done by summer of 24, get the roof on. And again, he's an architect and a great illustrator. His artistic view of the Pink from 1920. Well, December 7th, 23 is when Stellafane, the Springfield telescope makers, were formally incorporated as a club. We just had our meeting up there. Never mind. What the club looked like then. Working on the roof again. And the inside had a fireplace. It had a meeting room on the first floor, and upstairs was a place they could bunk out for the night after observing. So here's the fireplace. They'd cook and discuss things. That's all still present. The stairs will come down, and you go up top. And when you're tired, you bunk out and till morning and go home. It worked. So again, here's some of the original founders, early in 24 and 25. And Russell was a great proselytizer, and he was an inspiration to many people around him, which is why his legacy still lives on today. And he was constantly mentoring younger people and people new to the hobby. Here's some of the original founders later in life. I think this is probably around the 1930s. And they're fixing the road to Stellafane. Again, they dressed pretty well back then. I actually dressed at that 23 meeting. I dressed up as Russell Porter the entire time. I should have brought it down, I guess. And again, he still had a sense of humor, constantly poking fun at himself and others. So pane one, they're looking at a comet, they're arguing over it. They start a fight, they destroy the telescope, and then they just decide to sit down and observe the comet naked eye. Okay, so here is Albert Ingalls. He was an editor for, why am I blocking? I'm blocking on Scientific American. Sorry, I guess I'm getting old. He was an editor for Scientific American, and he had a small telescope in New York City. And he heard about this phenomenon up in Vermont about people building their own rather large, but then an 8-inch telescope was like Mount Palomar to us, okay? To have someone up in the mountains build 8-inch telescopes was miraculous. He had a little 2 or 3 incher. So he wanted to go up and check this out. So he goes up to Stellafane and the Springfield telescope makers. This is the Springfield mount, by the way, a mount that Porter also designed where you kind of just stand in one place. The mirror swings around and you don't have to move around a lot or climb a ladder, and the weight's up at the top. But what intrigued him was how many people could build reasonably accurate scientific instruments. So he decided to write this up as an article in Scientific American, November of 1925. Here is the solar projection inside the clubhouse. And it was Scientific American, 1925, The Heavens Declare the Glory of God. And he called it that because that's what's on the pink on the gable. And he pointed out in the article how people build their own telescopes. They have a solar telescope. They with just rudimentary equipment, able to make very solid scientific instruments. This hit the scientific world like a bomb. Everyone in the world wanted to learn how to do this, literally. So they set up kits that they could give out to people and sell for reasonable costs. They got orders from China, South Korea, Japan, South Africa. Literally, the entire world wanted to get in on the action. After this article came out, the Amateur Telescope Makers of Boston was founded for the same reason, and astronomy clubs sprang up all across the U.S. based on this article, and there were other articles to follow up on. So Ingalls and Porter made quite a splash. Here in 1928, he kept coming up because he thought this was fantastic, which it was. And that led to publication of Amateur Telescope Making Part 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, which was basically a step-by-step guide how to build telescopes, how to make different types of telescopes, and how to grind and set up your, and again, right there, Tasmania, India, South Africa, all these different, literally across the world, everyone heard about this through Scientific American. Fixing the roof again. Sundial, he was fond of sundials, that's still there. The transit scope, that's not functional right now, but that was set up for years. And he'd sit inside and look at the sun. And they took trips to Boston, Cambridge, at Harvard, and we met with the Amateur Telescope Makers of Boston. We helped with the club up there. I'm a member of both. And I'll say, if you really want to build a telescope, join a club that does telescope making. I mean, I was a brash 12-year-old when I decided to build my own. Came out pretty good. 8-inch f7. If you do an f7 or above, parabolizing is minimal. Sphere almost does it. And spheres are darn easy to make. It's when you get to f6, 5, and 4 that you really have to work hard to make a parabola. But I'll say quite candidly, if it wasn't for help from older members of the Amateur Telescope Makers of Boston or up at Stellafane, I probably couldn't have built any of my more advanced telescopes. The telescope you saw at the beginning, I had lots of help. Okay, many people volunteered to help me design, build, and stuff like that. Anyways, so I owe them quite a bit, and but that's the way to get going and get started on it. So 1926, first members were collected for a picture. You can see Russell Porter, a little bit paunchy there on the right with knickers on, and here he is sitting down. 1926 again. And they'd get together for dinner, observe all night. They have star parties. Starting in 1926, they started inviting people from all over the country, and a lot of people came. So 1927, it starts getting crowded up there. 1929. So he decided they'd build a turret like Harkness did, since they had access to all the equipment at Jones and Lambert, which used to be to building big equipment and gears. They thought they'd right in front of the pink, they'd set up a turret telescope like Harkness did, but a much bigger scope, a 16-inch. Whoops. Come on. There we go. So here is Russell Porter fanciful view of what the turret telescope should look like. He was a classicist. This belongs probably on Mount Olympus. This is what it actually came out to look like. Still impressive, even though not as fanciful as his drawing there, but it shows you where his mind was at. He always wanted to push the limit to get the best out of people. But this is still being used today. So you have a mirror down at the base with a hole in it. It mirrors, the glass isn't in it right now. It would shoot up to a flat, go back, and then go inside, and you would observe on the inside. And here they are making the gears and the metal work at Jones and Lambert. Trucking it up the hill.
Wow.
And then, of course, they didn't have heavy machinery back then, but they managed to sled this up, kind of like what they built the pyramids. Got it up there, a lot of slave labor. Come on, there we go. See, right now they're getting that incredibly heavy metal ring up on top of the cement. This is gonna be a longer talk than I expected if I can't get this thing to work. You move it. Just not advancing. Yeah, I think they have to. It's not moving. Okay, whoop. Now it moved, and I didn't want it to. There we go. They had this tower there, and he climbed up just before the dome was put on. And here is the glass that is still being used. Parabola with a hole in it and a flat. And it works quite well. I've used it. Go inside, you just dial in the RA and deck, hand crank it, and then they got a it used to be a hand crank, now it's an electric motor. But you dial in the deck and you get up there and you observe through the center of that wheel. You don't have to move. You can sit down and observe. If you live in Vermont, you understand why. There it is with the glass in place, actually. And then 1930 Star Party for the dedication of that. Stellafane Convention. Again, the crowds are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. 1930s is Porter with the white hat and Ingalls to the right. And that kind of, again, he started inspiring people, build your own telescope. So this Ralph Patton, which is from the Rhode Island Club, and this is a telescope he built in 1930. Pretty respectable instrument even today. Others were inspired to have a portable telescope. See a telescope attached to the Model T on the side? You see it? So again, he was building these through Jones and Lambert, these garden telescopes. You have one out here, take a look at it. And they were proved quite popular. He was selling them across the country. And he used it here as a solar projector on a piece of paper, looking at the sun. Come on, there we go. Viewing Venus in daylight. Many of the things we think are modern observing methods, he originated. So it's looking at Venus in daylight. Here they are imaging in 1930. Notice the long, small refractor, and it's guiding a reflector scope attached to it, taking an image. Now, back then, we didn't have CCDs. Don't forget, this is slow, incredibly slow plates, and you basically had to hand guide. That's what he's doing, hand guiding with a knob there to keep the star centered on a crosshair for literally hours. I haven't done that in the 1980s. I know how fatiguing it is. I did it in the dome. He's doing it out in the open, which I can't conceive of. But they got images that way. Later inventions. He attracted people from around the world to come see Stellafane back then. So his fame spread. Back then, 1929, the world's biggest telescope was the 100-inch Hooker on Mount Wilson. Hale wanted a bigger telescope. He managed to get the funds together to start constructing a 200-inch telescope, which would be an enormous leap, 4 times bigger, basically, surface area. And he wanted the best people in the world to come work on this. Who was better than Russell Porter? So he enticed him to come to California to be one of the lead engineers and site survey men to help build his dream telescope, which would be a 200-inch telescope. He took that advantage to make a cross-country trip, Pikes Peak, Petrified Wood, California house, which he bought. There he is visiting Mount Wilson in 1929 with his wife and daughter. And he took side trips to Death Valley. Again, always a sense of humor. Hurry up, Oscar, it's awfully hot here, is the caption there. So he studied the Hooker telescope. Here it is. By the way, if you ever get a chance so you can actually observe with the Hooker these days, I've done it. It's incredible. My best view of Saturn ever was through that, as well as several galaxies. It was, according to them, the steadiest night they had in years. It was absolutely amazing. But that's the 100-inch Hooker. It's built in the old style, which is basically like an erector set. So he looked at that and he got ideas to how to build the 200-inch. Here's the 60-inch, looked at that one as well. So here is Ellery Hale. He drew paintings of everyone he met, basically, in front of the eventual 200-inch telescope that was done by Porter. So they started surveying for the best spot, and they settled on Mount Palomar. And here he is in the center. He's facing the other direction. They're arguing where the scope's going to go. I think they settled on this spot. And he brought up survey telescopes, and he spent many a night on Mount Palomar checking different sites there, as well as a couple of other mountains, actually, to find where the best spot to put what would become the world's biggest telescope in the late 1940s. Site finally chosen. X marks the spot. And here is surveying drawings of where the 200-inch telescope was going to go, along with the mountain. Here was his first design for the 200-inch. It was not accepted. It's a little clunky. Again, he was inspired by the 100-inch Hooker, but the design committee felt it was just a little bit too clunky and wanted a more modern, streamlined design. What's that? Oh, yeah, right. So here's the final design, which was finally accepted. And yes, there's a little person there on the steps there. That was eventually became the 200-inch telescope. It was his design, and that's what he submitted. Now, this is what finally got accepted. Russell Porter in 1935. And his paintings are famous. I mean, you go to Mount Palomar or any historical book about telescopes, you're going to come across Russell Porter drawings. So here is his drawing of the 200-inch telescope. He was famous for doing cutout drawings, which is in his engineering background and architect background. So here it is. Notice the scope is cut in half so you can see inside of it. The dome is cut in half so you can see the details and the outside of what would his vision of what it should look like. 200-inch, again, looking east. Again, these are all drawings by him. Notice the person at the bottom. Mirror supports. He drew detailed drawings of how they were going to be built and how they had to be made. On the right is the bearings, which was an oil bearing, by the way, it still is. And the deck axle, you could actually walk up inside of it. And I think this is looking north. Yeah, looking north, because the horseshoe was up top there. And again, very detailed and exquisitely detailed drawings so that the engineering concepts could come together and they could be designed and built. Again, looking north again. Outside. And looking in the, it was designed so, I mean, they didn't have autoguiders back then. So in order to observe, you sat inside. You know, there's a scaffolding. I've been there. You walk across with the telescope tilted over, you sat down, and then you moved around and the chair would swivel. But basically, the astronomer or observer's job was to basically follow a guide star all night long. The requirements for being an astronomer back then were ability not to fall asleep all night and not to have to pee for 24 hours. So, but that's how they did it. Ellery Hale took photo after photo, not just at Hooker, but then he went over to the 200-inch when it was built in 1947 and did his last years of work on the 200-inch. And that's how he got his photographs. By the way, they built the 1/10 scale model, still at Caltech right now. And he'd take side trips and do sketches all over the place. So here is the glass arriving. It was cast in Corning in New York. It was trucked across country and brought over to, they built a building just to grind and polish this 200-inch mirror. Jump ahead, there we go. So here it is being brought into the building. It raised quite a bit of excitement. Here is the mirror. Notice it's lightweighted in the back, and but it's still incredibly thick and heavy the way they were built back then. They didn't have actuators and supports like we have now for to make even larger telescopes. So it wasn't for actuators. You couldn't build a scope bigger than this. For years, people thought this is the biggest telescope that can ever be built. The Russians did build a 236-inch similar to this design. It never worked. That's why you don't hear anything about it. It just wasn't supported well enough. So this was felt to be the biggest telescope that'll ever be built until modern actuators were built so that you could do, depending on how the mirror was tilted, it would push and pull on the back of the mirror so it would maintain its shape. You need modern computers to be able to do that. Here is the grinding machine. And here is Russell Porter's view of how to grind the mirror as he got older in life. So here's a guy sleeping who is the lens maker. And by his, it's a Rube Goldberg device. Again, he had a sense of humor. By the heartbeat, it would initiate a cycle of grinding. And by his breath, it would make the motion go back and forth. I mean, obviously, he's being farcical, but the point is he He was always thinking along strange lines. So here is the coelostat that was designed by him while he was there and still at Caltech. That's for solar work. Griffin Observatory, I don't know how many people realize, but he had a big, and just look at it, it's a Russell Porter design. Remember that original design of what the Porter telescope at on Breezy Hill would be? He finally built it. It's called Griffith Observatory. Anyways, that should have been earlier. This is when they were building the building at Caltech in order to do the grinding and polishing of the 200-inch. Oscar Marshall is one of the original founders of Stellafane. He's a great machinist, reportedly, so he dragged him to California to work on the 200-inch. And that's one of his telescopes. And while he was there, being Russell Porter, who's on the second side, I don't know who the proximal person is, but he decided to teach Caltech students how to build telescopes. So here they are demonstrating grinding and polishing so that people can build their own telescopes at Caltech. Quite a crowd. Everywhere he went, he drew a crowd and was a great proselytizer for amateur astronomy. Caltech portrait that was commissioned while he was there. He kept coming back, even though he was now based in California. Every year, he would come back to Stellafane. And here is 1930s, he came back. Come on. Here we go. Oh. But then he would go back and work on the 200-inch. Here they are, Labe making one of the parts for the Hale telescope. And he would be overseeing that. He kept in touch with the Stellafane people. We have lots of correspondence from him, which is in our archives. Here's one from 1932, staying in touch, and he makes a drawing of waving on the West Coast to people on the East Coast, and a letter about just keeping in touch. 1932, there was an eclipse across northern New Hampshire, Conway, New Hampshire. He was there. That's him on the upper left, setting up equipment to photograph the sun. And here he is on the ground setting up camera equipment. He's got that funny hat. He's on the right there. So he's constantly doing things here. They're up in Conway. Notice the cars back then. And a successful eclipse expedition. He's in the middle on the bottom there. So here they are back at Stellafane with the eclipse. And the 1932 Stellafane convention. Notice the cars back then. That was the parking lot for Stellafane. 1934 convention. 1936 convention. He was always there. Allentown group from Pennsylvania. He met with them. He actually went to their place in Pennsylvania. But here they are coming up there to view at Stellafane. This is 1937, I believe that says. And then, the war years came. So our work on the 200-inch Hale kind of came to a stop and was resumed in, I believe it was 45, and they finished the 200-inch in 47 when it was dedicated. Stellafane did not meet from 1940 to 45, and then started up again in 46. 47, he was, just as the telescope was being dedicated, he was brought up into the cage, something he basically spent his entire second half of his life building. So I'm sure that was a treat for him. He died soon after. And Stellafane, without his moral guidance, almost fell into disrepair. They had meetings, But then in the early 50s, all the older guiding lights kind of died off. And there were a couple of years in the early 50s when it didn't meet. I'm proud to say that Amateur Telescope Makers of Boston stepped in 1954 to resurrect it. They said they would guarantee the gate and the funds and everything. And 1954 was a huge hit. 600 people showed up. And every year after that, it's just grown and grown and grown until now it's typical. We get 1,000, 1,500 every year. It dropped off a little bit with COVID, where for 2 years we didn't have a meeting because of COVID primarily, but then started up again. And that's not quite at the peak it was like in 2019, but we're close this past year. And this is the Saturday evening program when we have an outdoor talk and give away the prizes, which is the heart of the, unlike most conventions, the heart of Stellafane is building a telescope. You can come up with a store-bought telescope if you want, but no commercial exhibits are allowed. It's all about amateur telescope making. So I'm one of the mechanical judges. We encourage people to build them, bring them there. If you built one, please bring it, enter it into the contest, and we judge it both mechanical, innovations, and optical quality. There are 3 different types of prizes. And here's one of the telescopes there, but that's the heart of Stellafane. So we have a guest speaker, very renowned speakers all the time, but the heart of it is judging the telescopes and giving out awards to people who built their scopes. Optical quality counts for the most, of course. I'm grinding another mirror right now, in fact, a 12-inch f4. Not sure, now that I'm down here for the winter, I probably won't have it done in time for this coming year, but I'm going to design a scope that completely comes apart. I'm thinking of carbon fiber and a little bit of wood pieces and plastic, so it'll fit in the suitcase into the overhead, and so I can take it anywhere, a 12-inch. The mirror is right now about 1/3 wave, so I got about another month of work to get it to. Commercial telescopes are good if they're quarter wave. I'm sure you've heard that, right? Okay. No quarter wave telescope is good enough for a real amateur telescope maker. I won't stop till it's at least 10th wave. And because otherwise they won't forgive me and I won't get a prize. We have terrible judges. They want absolute perfection. And, it's just, if you're running a business, of course, you get a mirror, it's good enough. It meets specs, you send it out and make your money. But if you're an amateur telescope maker, you're not rushing against an artificial deadline for a business. You're making something for generations. Telescopes don't go bad. They only gain value over time if they're well made. So, why stop when it's quarter wave? Work an extra month or 2, get it to 1/10 wave. The Stroll ratio is then over 90%. You essentially got a perfect mirror. That telescope will beat, I guarantee you, any winner at Stellafane will beat any telescope you've ever looked at that's a commercial telescope, always, because they're always way better than quarter wave. And why not? You're building it yourself. So here is the final night. And here is a nice night at Stellafane. This was taken by Dennis DeChico, another friend of mine. He got a nice picture of the Milky Way and one of the Perseids and what it looks like now. So that's what Stellafane is. I hope I've convinced you that Russell Porter was a incredibly Renaissance man who dabbled in a lot of things, but without his inspiration, we may have had amateur astronomy build up later. Someone else may have done it, but he was the first. He publicized it. With Ingles' help, it became a worldwide phenomenon. And that's why we have amateur clubs all across the country, because of this, because it started with people being able to build telescopes and not spend, several years' salary to buy a tiny rinky-dink telescope. And people did it for chump change. The average person could now build, use, and contribute to science. And it was all because of Russell Porter. If you're ever up in the Vermont area in August, come stop by the convention. Love to have you there. I'll stop there and answer any questions.
Thank you. All right. Just as a side, I was up there in 1980.
Yeah.
You had a cow going through their stuff. We had a skunk go through the edge of the tin fields.
Well, that's what happens in the wild.
Yeah. All right, anybody got questions out here? Come over.
How big of tools, can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, how big of tools did you use to grind your 36?
32. Let's not exaggerate. The 30, that was my second 32. My first one was a parabola and a straight Newtonian F4. And that was a bear. It took me 6 months to get to a sphere and another a little over 2 years to get it to a parabola, and I barely made quarter wave. The difficulty of grinding a mirror goes up by the cube for every inch you add. It's just become hotter and hotter and hotter. It worked fine, but it was not the precise optics I wanted. Then I wanted to build another one because that one was in New Hampshire. We were going to sell that place. A friend of mine, Scott Milligan, is a professional optical designer. Everyone remember that the Hubble had some problems at first? Okay. He was one of the design team to fix it. So he said, don't do a parabola. I've got a design where we basically do a Hubble, do a sphere, and build corrector lenses, and they're all spherical. So basically, it went from a 3-year ordeal to 6 months to get a 20th wave sphere. Spheres are easy. Anyone can do a sphere. Spheres are darn easy to make, no matter what the size is. So he said, build a sphere, then we'll do a mangan. Now, the mangan's tricky. Mangan is a spherical surface, but a flat back. I'm terrible at flats. He actually ground that part for me. So that's one part I actually didn't make. He designed the whole telescope, though. It's basically his design. I just followed directions well. And then we had 4 corrector lenses down the middle that eliminated all color aberrations and made it flat. And the beauty of it, every surface was spherical. So consequently, it turned a ridiculously difficult job into an easy job. Now, would I do 11 surfaces for an 8-inch telescope? No, that's ridiculous. But for anything over 20, 24 inch, it saves an incredible amount of time. And my 32 inch is 1/16th wave. Not many big scopes meet that. I can take pictures of planets with my 32. So anyways, that's the story behind it. What's that?
Like a box at the top without even that's all spherical.
Yeah, that's all spherical too. That's true. But the curve is deep and the F ratio is very long. This is F6.
Any other questions from here?
I was just wondering, what were they using for coating the mirrors back then when they first started building those things?
Excuse me, I didn't catch that.
How were they coating the mirrors back when they first started those small?
How were they what with the mirrors?
Coating them?
Coating them. Oh, silver. In fact, the Amateur Telescope Makers Book 2 has a whole section how to silver your telescope. And every 6 months, you'd have to resilver it. Aluminum chambers weren't being done back then.
Any other questions from in here? How about online? Oh, I got it.
So they chemically remove the silver and then apply the silver chemically as well.
It's kind of a two-parter. It looks like you guys only build mirrors, or do some members?
No. Some members have done
They do
refractors. Yeah.
But that actually brings up the second half. When you build these telescopes, particularly when they built back then, where do they get eyepieces? Did they make them? Did
They made them.
buy them?
Yeah, they made them. They were mostly,
Or was it energy with microscopic?
yeah, I mean, little optics were easy to make, and they were mostly Huygens type, and they were all spherical surfaces. So they weren't that difficult to make. I mean, they're not the modern eyepieces we have now, like a Nagler, but they worked pretty well for what they were doing.
Okay. Anybody online got a question? If so, unmute and ask.
I have a
I
question.
recognize a few people up there.
Yeah.
Don't call on them.
I see you, Tom. Go ahead.
Yes, I noticed the inscription on the building. I remember seeing it when I was there about 30 years ago. The heavens declare the glory of God. And I noticed that it was in some of the early pictures from the 20s as well. So it was obviously there from the time that the house was being designed. Do you know who came up with that?
No, it's a verse from the Bible, and one of the original club members chose it to be placed on the side of the building. I should know that. I actually don't. What's
The
that?
answer is God.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know which club member decided to take that verse though and put it on the building.
All right. Any other questions?
Hey, this is Roxanne. Do they send out kits anymore for people to set up, or is it mainly you would do?
No, you don't need to do in Wilman Bell. There are other places. It's getting actually hard. Ever since COVID, a number of companies went out of business and the price of blanks have, for some reason, gone through the roof. Hopefully that'll come back down to normal. But a number of older companies like Corning stopped making blanks. You can still get shot glass. There's a couple of companies in Germany for glass, but for some reason, glass has become difficult and expensive to get. Pyrex glass specifically. You don't want to use plate glass. It has striations. It won't keep its shape. Don't forget, when you grind the mirror, it's got to keep a shape to the nanometer. And a millionth of an inch is 25 nanometers. So any glass that expands or contracts too much, you'll lose its shape. So you really want a good stable glass that is annealed properly, so it's cooled slowly, so there's no strain in the glass. Otherwise, with change in temperature, it'll warp out of shape. So choose your glass properly. It's got to be well annealed glass, and then it's got to be ground and polished properly. But if you don't have good glass, you'll never keep its shape, no matter what you do.
Anyone else? All right. Well, I do thank you, Maria.
Okay. Nice to see you, everyone.
We're going to look at getting a slideshow going here. Turn the lights on for since it's astronomical imagery. Okay. You need to share over here. See the other one? Okay.
No. Steve, also. Southwest Florida astronomy. NGC 7822. Nebulous. Fireworks Galaxy. I can't see the reading. This is by Linwin Ferguson. He's a member of the club. This is by Mike Jensen, member of the club. Also, Mike Jensen. It's the horse head. Mike Jensen. That's cool.
Who's doing the narrating?
I like that one. Wow, look at that place. Monkey Head Nebula. Sure, it looks that way. It's got a face there. This is all.
You guys have been busy. Nice job. All right. I know that there are some people here who may be new visiting. If they're new, if you could just at least stand up and give us your name so we know who you are and be able to talk at you if you've got any questions or anything. Anybody over there?
I'm Mike Neal, so I'm new to the club and spending more money than I ever wanted.
Yeah, spending money is a big factor in this hobby sometimes. Where's the mic? You have a mic there? There we go. All right. Anybody else?
I have a gimpy knee. I'm Paul Leopold. I'm a member of the Everglades Astronomical Society and also a life member of Cuyahoga Astronomical Association up in Cleveland. And I've been building telescopes for 50 years.
Little experience there. Anybody else?
Yeah, David Westcott just moved back to Southwest Florida from Wisconsin. Brand new to all of this, so I actually enjoy this quite a bit. Thanks.
Thank you.
Same here, Rob Prosser, new to the area and that type of stuff, and interested as a hobby, so wanted to come over.
All right, thanks. Thanks for coming in. Anybody else? Okay. All right, do a quick rundown.
This is Derek Rooney. I'm online. I'm a new member as
there you
well.
are.
I couldn't
Okay.
make it down today.
Oh, that's fine. Joining us online is fine. Glad to have you. Okay. Events, what was December 8th at Moore like, Tom? Unmute yourself.
I'm going to summarize what everything's been like since the beginning of this observing season in September. For 4 months of observing nights at Moore Observatory and for 4 afternoons of solar observing at parks around Charlotte County, all 8 of them have either been mostly to partly cloudy. We didn't have very good luck on the 8th, and on solar observing on the 23rd, it was totally cloudy when we started. We had a little bit of a break in the middle and it totally clouded over again at the end. Next week, on next Friday, is our next public event at Moore Observatory. Right now, the weather forecast shows rain. So we've struck out this year on every event so far, except for one. The solar eclipse was absolutely perfect skies all afternoon to watch the partial solar eclipse. So it's the only time we had good luck was during the solar eclipse. So far this year, it's been a big dud.
Yeah, I know what you mean. We got lucky on Big Cypress on December 9th. It actually cleared for the time that we were out there. Joe Dermody and I were down there, and it was quite nice. Jupiter and Saturn were beautiful. Looked at several other objects and stuff. Joe was doing stuff with his binoculars and all. So it actually turned out good. By the time it wound down, the clouds started coming in. But it was good for the evening and all. And December 16th, the Seahawk got plotted out. Joe was going to cover that for me, and it just was not going to happen, you know. Upcoming wise, you've got more observing on the 12th, right, Tom?
Yes, we do. Next Friday, like I said, doesn't look very good weather-wise right now.
No. And we've still got to work out our Seahawk Park Star Party schedule. So once I have that, I'll put that out for everybody. And then you're going to try on the 27th for solar observing, right?
Well, here's what, yeah, and if we do, here's something I was going to possibly change, but let me give you an update. The solar observing for that Friday, it's that Saturday in January, whatever the date is supposed to be at Bayshore Live Oak Park, which is fine. We've been there, but we've also been there and far away from the Sunseeker Resort, which they were building for the past 4 or 5 years. So we try to stay as far down in the park away from the construction. Well, the Sunseeker Resort opened up 2 weeks ago on the 15th of December. And I took a ride there the other day, I think it was yesterday, in fact, to see if we could move back down closer to the resort where we've got more people now who are staying at the resort to come over and look at the sun. But I've seen an article in the paper that morning about some problem with the parking, which they set up to be on a grassy area, which used to be blacktop, and they removed the blacktop. And the article in the paper, and I verified what the paper said, is right now a big mud hole.
Oh,
The grass has just turned to mud. And so they blocked it off. So you can't even really park down there at this point. So until they do something about it, we won't be there. We won't be moving down there this month, but in 3 months, we'll try again. I'll just keep checking it out. Hopefully they come up with some way of fixing the parking down there so you can park on a relatively dry surface. It seemed pretty good if they can fix it for, various spots to set up our solar telescopes. So I'm hoping we can get down there and then get closer to the people that'll be staying there at the resort, and we get a lot bigger crowds than we get at the other end of the park, which is probably
Yeah.
about a 10-minute walk away. So anyway, that's what's happening. We'll be in our usual spot at the far end of Bayshore Park at the end of this month.